You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Hey, did you notice the United States is about to have a new president? Or maybe go back to its old one. With President Joe Biden bowing out of the race for the next term in the White House, the country is now set for different leadership. And its Vice President Kamala Harris set to duke it out with Donald Trump come November. Today, we're running our eyes over what a Harris administration might look like, especially from a green perspective. Hi, I'm Jack Board. Welcome to Climate Conversations. My co-host Li-Ling Tan is off this week, but she will be back soon. Today, instead, I have a special guest to chat all things US politics and naturally, climate and energy policy. It's been a wild time in Washington of late. An assassination attempt to the will he, won't he debate about President Biden. In the end, he won't. And now it's Kamala Harris as the presumptive nominee for the Democrats. It's been a ride. To make sense of it, I'm joined by Dr. Carolyn Kissane. She's the founding director of the SBS Energy, Climate Justice and Sustainability Lab and the Associate Dean at the NYU Center for Global Affairs. Carolyn, thanks so much for joining me.
Jack, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited for our conversation.
Firstly, you've been in the US. Can you give me a sense just of the turbulence of the state of American politics over the past few weeks?
So you asked only over the past few weeks, but I would say it's
right.
a very turbulent period. But I think, the big news was when President Biden announced that he would be stepping out of the presidential race. For many people who had been encouraging the president to step down, it was a relief and an opportunity for another candidate, another nominee to emerge, which happened very quickly with Vice President Kamala Harris sort of stepping in to the presidential nomination.
Yeah, and we've also had an assassination attempt.
I didn't even go back to that. So for your audience, it looks quite like the United States is in disarray politically. It is again, it's the attempted assassination attempt, the questions over Biden's competency, and then, the announcement to kind of turn things around. So it definitely feels that the political tone and the environment, especially in the Democratic side, has shifted quite dramatically.
Let's talk about Kamala Harris then. She is somewhat of a known commodity, obviously the vice president for the past 4 years nearly, and a US senator and a prosecutor in California before that. And mostly, I think it's fair to say she's been in lockstep with President Biden in terms of policy. And that's the nature of being the Veep, right? The president's policies become your policies. But she's also run for president herself before in 2019. And she's been the one who notably attended climate talks at COP28 in Dubai last year in place of President Biden. How do you assess the cachet that she has in this space?
So Vice President Kamala Harris has always been strong. So she was strong as an attorney general for the state of California, also as a California's senator. And as vice president, as you pointed out, she has been very much behind President Biden's energy and climate policies. Biden has been a strong climate advocate, and we can talk more about that. People expect Harris to be even more enthusiastic and have more robust policies when it comes to addressing climate change.
To this administration, policy architecture, I guess, has been centered around what's known as the Inflation Reduction Act, I think somewhat awkwardly called the IRA. Can you give us a bit of an explainer about the IRA, why it's significant for America, especially in the climate and energy space?
The Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed in August of 2022, it was very important. It was considered to be the United States' most ambitious climate legislation. And it was passed after the infrastructure bill, which was also considered to be kind of landmark for addressing infrastructure in the United States, which is in great need of attention and repair. But the Inflation Reduction Act was very solely focused on climate in the way of industrial policy. So how to support what many referred to as the green economy, and to support both the deployment, the production of more renewable energy, and to really incentivize production in the United States. So to provide tax incentives, to provide funding through grants coming out of the Department of Energy to help to support the United States becoming a much larger, stronger player in the renewable energy and the clean technology space. I think it is very important to address it was also a massive funding signal in the order of almost $400 billion that was to really set the direction for U.S. industrial policy around what's referred to as clean green energy, but also to show that the United States could and would be competitive with China.
I think Harris has been made a champion of the IRA of late. At least it seems like that. She's been out on the road. She's been doing a lot of media around this very important policy. Now, does that affect her electability? Like, is this a popular policy? Is taking action on climate change something that can win over voters at this critical time?
Yes. And what's really important about the IRA, and I would love for your audience to kind of look at a map as where funding at this point in time has gone. And interestingly enough, it has been red states which have actually received the largest amount of funding. And part of that is because these are states that are generally have a lot of land, and then they are very ripe for energy production in the sense of thinking about green hydrogen, thinking about renewable natural gas, nuclear, solar, wind, and a host of battery technologies, a host of other things that are included in the IRA. So there's actually been general political support for the Inflation Reduction Act. However, like many large pieces of legislation in the United States, also politicized. So former President Trump, who is the Republican nominee, and he has said that he will repeal the IRA. So I think on the campaign, Trump will weaponize the IRA and threaten to repeal it. However, in reality, in terms of when whomever is president in January of 2025, that president will retain and keep the IRA. Harris has been a very strong advocate of the IRA, and I think she will continue to, while on the campaign trail, continue to throw her support for a very critical reason. She wants to win over the young vote in the United States, which young people want to see stronger action on climate change. But President Biden is not viewed as having been strong on climate. So that is where you will see and are seeing a kind of a stronger pivot on the part of Harris to say that she will be more ambitious than was President Biden.
Yeah, that's really interesting because given the scale of the IRA and the amount of money that's being mobilized for so many different sectors, it's interesting that you think that Biden is not viewed by the electorate as having done much on climate change. So for Kamala Harris, do you think that she would be potentially more aggressive on big oil, for example? Would she be harder on environmental justice? We know in the past that she's been against certain trade deals that didn't have strong environmental protections in place, and she's also been against sanctions on certain products like solar panels. How do you see her pushing the needle on climate if she was to emerge as the next president?
It's a very fine line in the United States for a politician when it comes to energy and climate. So in her past, as you pointed out, she has prosecuted big oil. You know, she's taken Chevron, ConocoPhillips. She has pushed ExxonMobil. She has pushed very hard for environmental justice. She did that as a senator in support of the Green New Deal, which did not pass, but she was very strongly in support of. And to your earlier point, she was the deciding vote on the passing of the IRA. The interesting point, and this is where it's, again, I would encourage your audience to sort of think about this very delicate balance that you have to sort of be aware of in the United States as a politician in the position that Harris is in, is that the United States, and this was the challenge for Biden, you have this very strong oil and gas production, and you have, I think, some of the most climate-forward legislation and funding for clean energy, but it was hard for him to thread the needle on the messaging on that. So Harris is viewed more climate-forward, has historically been harder on big oil. However, as the nominee, it would be a mistake for her to come out as an ardent opponent of big oil and gas. Because they are, one, a very large lobby, and two, it's very scary for most Americans to imagine that their energy prices will be higher. I think her campaign has to sort of balance being an advocate for addressing climate change while not coming across as being very anti-hydrocarbons and hydrocarbon production in the United States.
What about on the other side of politics? You mentioned earlier that President Trump has campaigned against the IRA. We know that he withdrew the United States from the Paris Agreement last time he was president. What do you see unfolding over the next 4 years if Trump does emerge again as president?
So he's already saying it. He would repeal the IRA, that U.S. energy dominance. The United States will produce more oil and gas than ever that they've ever produced. I mean, lots of big Trumpian language. However, I mean, again, this is what's a little bit of it's an interesting thing in the United States. More oil and more natural gas has been produced under the Biden administration that was produced under the Trump administration. So Trump is continuing to say that the United States will become more dominant and become bigger and better when it comes to oil and gas production, and of course, coal. So Trump can say he's going to bring back coal. He can't bring back coal, not in the way that, coal existed for the United States 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. But he will use the very strong rhetoric of being hard on renewables and soft on oil, gas, and coal. And I think an important thing is he will use the idea of the MAGA, the Make America Great, and do so in terms of saying, we're going to make it harder for China to get its renewable energy technologies, solar panels, wind technology, batteries, electric vehicles into the United States. So we will put up stronger barriers than has Biden on Chinese imports into the United States.
So do you see that US leadership is outward looking when it comes to being a leader in the climate space, or is it still too busy getting its ducks in a row, so to speak, domestically?
The United States has been doing more to address climate, and we've reduced our overall carbon emissions from energy production as well as just overall carbon emissions. It's a mixed picture in terms of where the United States is on climate. But I think you definitely see much more renewable energy that the United States is producing. But I think it's harder to say that the United States is a really big leader when it comes to climate because we also are such a large producer of oil and natural gas.
I think we should briefly touch on Kamala Harris's potential running mate. And there's obviously plenty of names in the ring. Do you have an eye on any of those candidates in particular, what they could bring to the energy or climate discussion? And does that actually matter given the perceptions and the background of Kamala Harris in the climate space?
The two that I think are the standout possibilities for Harris are Mark Kelly of Arizona and Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. And Josh Shapiro, who is the sitting governor of Pennsylvania, both important swing states. Josh Shapiro would be on the energy side a very interesting choice because Pennsylvania is the second largest producer of natural gas. And the way that natural gas is produced in Pennsylvania is through fracking. But he has been a very strong proponent of, let's call it, responsible fracking.
Right. And fracking, obviously, is something that Kamala Harris has threatened to ban in the past.
And that would be a mistake for her to do that while she's running for president. So Shapiro would be a very interesting partner to be very pragmatic on energy and very pragmatic on where the United States is and what the United States can do. Also, Mark Kelly in Arizona, I think, again, very pragmatic on energy policy. He's got such a strong background as an astronaut, so a Navy SEAL. His parents were police officers. His wife was shot, so around guns and thinking about gun legislation. So he hits a lot of important points. And Arizona also is, just very interesting in terms of its own energy policy. So both of them would kind of serve as a balance to her perception as being left of center on energy and climate. She should not come out and say that she's going to ban fracking. That would be, in my opinion, a Clinton moment, in 2016, saying that she was going to ban coal or limit coal. So I think Harris has to kind of, moderate those positions while being climate forward.
That's it for Climate Conversations. Thank you for joining me. Li-Ling will be back next week. And hey, get in touch. We're keen to hear your ideas and thoughts. I'm Jack Board. Thanks as always to the team that put together this podcast: Tiffany Ang, Janani Jahari, Crispina Robert, and Sai Ye Win.